My name is Marina. I'm 37 years old, a first lieutenant in the U.S. Marine Corps, my voice steadying despite the knot in my chest. Standing before my family and friends, I felt my heart pounding like a drum in my chest, a relentless rhythm that threatened to drown out everything else. At 37, as a first lieutenant in the U.S. Marine Corps, I had faced enemies in the field, but nothing could prepare me for the tension radiating from the front row at my wedding. My father, the man whose approval I had chased all my life, stood with his arms crossed, a critical brow raised, mocking the very vows I was about to take. "Look at her," he said, loud enough for the closest guests to hear. "Doesn't she look like she knows what she's doing?" The laughter that rippled through the crowd felt like a punch to my gut, tightening my breath as I struggled not to let his disdain ruin my moment. I had imagined this day for years, a celebration marked by love and commitment, but my father's voice cut through the joy like a serrated knife. How was it possible that after so many years of service, accolades, and achievements, I could still feel like a little girl desperate for her dad's approval? The heat rose to my face, and sweat trickled down my back as I tried to focus on my soon-to-be husband, standing tall beside me, his eyes filled with love and unwavering support. Yet, the weight of my father's scorn loomed larger than the marriage I was about to enter. I could sense the uncertainty creeping in, as if my father's derision had the power to strip away the future I had fought so hard to build. As the ceremony proceeded, I could feel the blood rushing in my ears, the images of my past flashing before me, little girl dreams, teenage aspirations, my time at boot camp, and the sacrifices I had made alongside fellow Marines who had respected me for who I was, not who my father wanted me to be. He had never understood that the strength I carried came not only from rank or uniform but from overcoming the doubts that had been planted in my mind throughout my life. Each syllable of the vows felt heavy, as if I was lifting weights in combat training. My hands trembled slightly around the bouquet, a whirl of white petals that contrasted with the darkness of my father's tone. Then came the moment that would forever be etched in my memory. As I turned to face my husband, the Marines who had been seated among the guests stood in unison, a lean, powerful force of solidarity. "Semper Fi," they shouted, the words echoing through the air like a clarion call, a reminder of the strength and commitment that defined my life. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, I could see in their eyes the respect and admiration I had longed for but never received from my father. Their salute was not just a show of honor, it was a fierce declaration, a reassurance that I was not alone in this moment, nor in my life. In this moment, amongst the laughter and chaos, a flicker of defiance ignited within me, and I felt myself grow just a little taller. Not for the first time, I realized that my worth was not tethered to my father's approval but anchored in my own values and the people who truly loved me. I had earned my place in the world, not just as a Marine, but as a woman ready to carve out her life on her own terms. As the service concluded, I locked eyes with my husband, exchanging a smile that spoke volumes, one that promised a partnership built on respect, love, and shared dreams. My chest felt lighter now, my heartbeat steadying as I took a deep breath and prepared to walk down the aisle towards my future, my shoulders squared and my head held high. Before I go on, subscribe to the channel. Here, we tell the untold stories of military women, courage, sacrifice, and truth. Your support helps more voices like mine be heard. The day had finally arrived, yet as I looked around the modest event space filled with family and friends, I felt an odd cocktail of dread and pride swirl within me. I'd stood in formation countless times, commanding respect, but here, at my wedding, I was supposed to be at ease. Instead, my father's biting remarks had already begun to echo in my ears, cutting through the joyful chatter like a sharp serrated knife. "You should have worn a dress that didn't make you look like you just came back from basic training," he had sneered, and those words lingered like a shadow over my newly black dress. I'd tried to smile, keep my chin up, but inside, I felt a familiar indignation stirring. Was this all he saw? A soldier, not the woman I had become? As I stood at the altar, I felt the weight of the moment pressing down. My husband, Martin, stood patiently beside me, a steady anchor amidst the swirling currents of my emotions. The warmth of his hand in mine offered comfort, but it did little to ease the dissonance brewing in my thoughts. My father had been my hero once, back when I was a little girl, imagining myself in military dress, saluting a father I admired. Now, it felt like that very hero had taken up arms against me. Every sarcastic quip about my career choice, every poorly timed joke about my commitment to serving my country, clawed at the fabric of my happiness. I could practically hear him echoing, "You don't belong in a fairy tale, Marina, you belong in combat boots." I tried to focus on the ceremony, to lock my gaze onto Martin's and forget the mocking laughter that had rumbled through my childhood home when I decided to join the Corps. But my attention slipped. It was as if my reality was split in two, the sacred vows we were about to exchange and the childhood memories of disappointed expectations. I flashed back to the day I had come home in my dress blues for the first time, my heart full of pride only to be met with my father's pained silence. He had said nothing then, just stared at me as if I were a stranger. I had fought tooth and nail to carve my place in a world that didn't want me, but his dismissive taunts somehow undid all that hard-won resolve. And just as I was about to succumb to that internal battle, the unmistakable sound of a uniformed formation caught my ear. A small group of Marines quietly entered the venue, their presence commanding immediate attention. I felt a rush of adrenaline. These were my brothers and sisters, people who understood the sacrifices made for honor, duty, and loyalty. Their mere presence shifted the atmosphere, and suddenly, I was no longer a daughter struggling against her father's derision. I was a Marine, and everything that came with that identity surged back. As they lined up, standing tall and proud, my heart swelled with a mixture of gratitude and defiance. Then, as if choreographed by the very spirit of camaraderie that had carried us through our toughest days, the Marines snapped into formation, standing at attention. "Semper Fi," they shouted, their voices booming like thunder. The sound reverberated against the walls, drowning out any scorn and animosity I felt from my father. In that moment, I recognized an unbreakable connection with them, my family forged by shared experiences, sacrifice, and a commitment to something greater than ourselves. Their salute was an embrace that shielded me from the hurtful barbs that had rained down earlier. I didn't just belong here at the altar, I belonged to this life, this duty, this unwavering bond. And for the first time that day, I felt like I could breathe freely. I stood at the altar, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to focus on the vows I had rehearsed countless times. Each word echoed in my mind, but it was impossible to silence the chaotic thoughts swirling within me. As I glanced back, the sight of my father lounging against a pew, arms crossed and a smirk on his face, sent a shockwave through my system. Disappointment mingled with anger as I felt my pulse quicken, the nerves of the day morphing into something else entirely. This was supposed to be a day of joy, yet the mockery from my own flesh and blood tugged at the old wounds I thought had healed. Memories rushed back, vivid and unforgiving. I was no longer the first lieutenant in the U.S. Marine Corps, adorned with medals and hard-earned respect. I was a 12-year-old girl, standing at the edge of our driveway, dirt-streaked and disappointed. I remembered how I had returned home, beaming with pride after finishing my first drill. I had practiced for weeks, and all I wanted was my father's approval. Instead, he laughed, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he mimicked my awkward salutes and overenthusiastic chants. "What are you? Some kind of soldier," he had taunted, leaving me feeling small and ridiculous instead of celebrated. I shook my head, trying to dispel the memories, but my breath felt trapped in my lungs. I could almost hear the echoes of his laughter, mingling with the raucous camaraderie I had found in the Marines. In those moments with my fellow soldiers, I learned the meaning of brotherhood, the value of lifting each other up against the tides of doubt and judgment. Yet here I was, on the most important day of my life, haunted by the negativity that clung to me like an unwanted shadow. My father's disdain ricocheted off the memories of all those times I had fought against the world to prove myself, not just to him but to me. I forced myself to refocus on the present moment, to remind myself why I was standing there in that white dress, surrounded by friends and family who truly mattered. But my father's presence loomed too large, a bitter reminder of the skewed expectations I had battled for years. I felt the warmth of my fiancé's hand squeeze mine, grounding me momentarily. I took a deep breath, recalling the early mornings filled with drills, the late-night strategy sessions, and the unwavering commitment I had sworn to my country. This was my battleground now. This wedding was a testament to all I had overcome and become. As I prepared to speak my vows, a sudden disruption broke through the haze of my anger and disappointment. The doors swung open wide, and a sea of olive green filled the aisle. 200 Marines stood tall, disciplined, and proud, their faces a mix of joy and respect radiating through the congregation. The room fell silent as they saluted, their voices rising in unison, "Semper Fi." The chill that washed over me was electric, a reassurance that I was not alone. In that moment, I felt the warmth of acceptance envelop me, drowning out my father's mockery. I was part of something far greater than my past, and I owed it to myself to embrace it fully, today, tomorrow, and always. I stood alone on the edge of the lawn, the white tents and folding chairs flickering with the light of a setting sun. It was the kind of evening that made the world seem softer, but all I felt was the sharp sting of memories I'd rather forget. My father's voice echoed in my mind, his laughter cutting through the cheer of my wedding day like a knife. He'd always found a way to twist every significant moment into a joke, leading the charge in ridicule instead of support. I felt the weight of those memories pressing down on me, the embarrassment of my youth still raw. Moments from my childhood played on repeat, like the time I took the family dog for a walk in my uniform, and he teased me about being the only girl in a dress, a real Marine, and still being grounded by my gender. Even my own wedding day hadn't been exempt from his needling. As the speeches began, the room erupted with laughter and clinking glasses, but my mind drifted back to that day in the battlefield, where camaraderie was forged amidst chaos. There, I had the support of my fellow Marines, ready to stand shoulder to shoulder, and never hesitate to have each other's backs. I felt a kinship I rarely experienced in my own family, a bond that transcended blood. The air was thick with a sense of purpose and unity. When you fight together, you learn that family extends beyond DNA. But how could I explain that to my father? He saw ambition as a betrayal, and in his eyes, I had surely betrayed the role he thought I should play. I glanced at my husband, his eyes locked on me with a mix of love and concern. He knew my struggles with my father, and he had spent countless nights reassuring me that I was worthy of love and success. But I also knew that my father's disdain would always cloud our happiness. As the toasts turned to more personal anecdotes, I found myself wishing desperately for my father's approval, but as the laughter rose around me, I could hear him again, his voice now mocking the stories shared by my friends, the ones who'd seen me rise through the ranks, who'd gotten to know me as a leader, not merely as his daughter. Then came the moment that turned everything on its head. Just as I was about to sink into despair, there was a ripple in the crowd, a sudden shift in energy that stole the breath from my lungs. A group of Marines, who'd driven for hours to celebrate this day with me, stood at attention. Their uniforms gleamed under the soft iridescence of fairy lights, each of them saluting in unison, their voices breaking the silence with a forceful, "Semper Fi." The room fell still as every head turned, and I felt my heart swell. In that moment, my family of choice drowned out all the negativity that had been thrust upon me by my own blood. The warmth of their respect enveloped me, wrapping me in a protective embrace that I had wanted and needed for so long. There was no ridicule here, there was only honor and understanding. They saw me for who I was, a fierce, determined woman who had defied expectations and forged her own path. As I looked at my husband, a smile spread across my face, dissipating the tumultuous thoughts that had clouded my mind. My heart raced. This was my family, my true support system. They rose to my defense in a way my father never would. In their salute, I found a reflection of my worth. The moment reached out and grabbed me, promising that I could be both a fierce Marine and a bride, that I could craft a future where acceptance lived alongside my personal battles. As I stood nervously at the front of the chapel, I could feel the weight of my father's gaze boring into me, a mix of expectation and disappointment. He had never been one to express warmth easily, but today, on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, there seemed to be a palpable tension between us. I had once hoped he might finally see me, not just as his daughter, but as a woman who has fought to earn her place in a world that often undervalued her. Yet, as I caught sight of my father's gaze flicking towards my uniform, a stark, polished reflection of my commitment to the Corps, I felt that familiar knot tighten in my stomach. At that moment, a flood of memories crashed over me, each one highlighting my relentless need to prove myself. I was reminded of my early days in boot camp, standing shoulder to shoulder with fellow recruits, trying to navigate the weight of both my gear and my insecurities. I had always been fiercely determined, but in those formative weeks, I had to grapple with proving that I belonged. I could still hear the echoes of my drill instructor's voice, barking orders that pushed me to my limits. With every shout, I had learned to silence the fears that whispered I wasn't good enough. Here I was again, in a different battleground, but the stakes felt just as high. As the ceremony unfolded, each word spoken felt heavy with the history I carried. My heart raced with each beat, but I was determined to stand tall, to show my father that the girl he used to mock had transformed into a capable leader. Friends and family were there, smiling with pride in their eyes, but I could still sense his skepticism. I had longed for validation from him, but it always seemed just out of reach. It struck me then, perhaps my greatest battle hadn't been against my fellow Marines or in training exercises, but rather the battle within myself to accept that my worth was not determined by his approval. When the moment finally came for us to exchange vows, I felt an unexpected surge of courage. As I looked into my partner's eyes, I remembered not only the challenges we'd faced but also the victories that brought us here. The nervousness that had clung to me peeled away, replaced with a fiery determination. This was my commitment not only to my partner but also to myself, to embrace who I am, to honor the woman I fought to become. I could hear the voices of my friends, Marines and civilians alike, cheering me on from the sidelines. Their support wrapped around me like an armor I never knew I needed. Moments later, my husband turned to face my father, and the words exchanged between them sparked a flicker of uncertainty in my chest. But before I could dwell on it, a thunderous roar erupted from the back of the chapel. A group of Marines, clad in their uniforms, had come to witness our union. As they stood up in unison and saluted, the resounding SEMPER FI echoed in the sacred space. In that brief yet electrifying moment, my father's smirk faded, and I recognized a shift in the air. These Marines were not just my comrades, they heralded my journey, the hard-won respect I had fought for. I realized that perhaps, while he might not fully understand my path, there were others who did. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for me. As I stood there, my heart raced, the weight of my father's derision hanging in the air like a heavy fog. It wasn't just the words, it was the disapproval in his eyes that stung the most. I had envisioned my wedding day as a celebration of love and commitment, a day filled with joy and laughter. But as I looked across the crowd, I saw friends and family caught in an awkward silence, unsure how to navigate the piercing barbs my father had chosen to unleash. I had always been the daughter who wanted to please him, who sought his approval, but that day, his jokes cut deeper than I ever thought possible. My father's laughter was a cacophony that shattered the delicate atmosphere. It was as if he wanted to prove a point, to remind everyone of the little girl he had raised, not the woman in her battle dress who had earned my rank through sweat and sacrifice. I could feel my cheeks flush, fueled by a blend of anger and humiliation. I wanted to retreat, to hide behind the closest wall, but then another emotion welled up inside me, a fierce determination to reclaim my day, to show him and everyone else that I was no longer just Marina, his daughter. I was First Lieutenant Marina, a person forged in the crucible of service, resilient and proud. In that moment, a familiar chant broke through the murmur of the crowd, cutting through my jumbled thoughts. Semper Fi. The voice boomed from the back of the chapel, echoing off the walls as though it had been waiting for the right moment to rise above the chaos. One by one, 200 Marines in their dress blues stood tall, their chests swelling with pride as they rendered a salute that seemed to defy gravity. The room transformed, and suddenly I was no longer a daughter defined by her father's shadow. I was surrounded by a family of warriors who respected every battle I had fought. Those two simple words acted like a beacon, casting light on the uncertainty that had clouded the room. I felt the warmth of camaraderie wrap around me, and with it came a sense of purpose. The disbelief etched on my father's face was palpable as he recognized the power of what was unfolding before him. The mockery vanished, replaced by an unexpected silence, almost reverent. I could see the admiration in the eyes of my fellow Marines, the pride they felt for each other and for me, and it ignited a fire within me that pushed away the residual shame. I stood taller, no longer the girl who needed validation, but a woman who had fought and won, even against the toughest opponents. As I turned to meet my father's gaze, I found that my voice, once weak and trembling, had transformed into something fierce and unwavering. "This is who I am, Dad. I'm proud of my uniform, proud of what I've accomplished, and I hope one day you can be too." The words slipped out, raw and unapologetic, resonating with the strength of my experiences. I didn't need him to understand me completely, but I needed him to see me, to recognize the determination that had crafted my spirit. The power of those Marines, standing in solidarity, reminded me that I was part of something larger, a bond thicker than blood, woven through sacrifice and service. When I walked down the aisle that day, I knew I was no longer just my father's daughter. I was, and would forever be, a Marine. Standing before the altar, I could hear the faint echo of my father's words still reverberating in my mind. The moment was supposed to be filled with joy and love, yet somehow, his mocking tone overshadowed everything else. "This is the best you can do? A bunch of soldiers standing around like they're guarding a base?" I had always yearned for his approval, for a moment that reflected all the hard work I'd put into my career, but standing there in my wedding dress, surrounded by my Marine brothers and sisters, I felt a swell of defiance rise within me. They were more than just fellow service members, they were family. It was as if they sensed the weight of the moment, the pressure bearing down on me, and I resolved right then to put aside the hurt and embrace the support surrounding me. As the ceremony progressed, I watched the Marines. Their crisp uniforms stood in stark contrast to the fluttering white of my dress, yet I couldn't help but feel a kinship with them. Each detail in their stance, every sharp salute, was a testament to the discipline I had worked tirelessly to embody over the years. They had witnessed my struggles, both in combat training and in learning to reconcile my past with my present. Each drill, late night tasked with a seemingly impossible mission, had forged me into who I was that day. I could feel my heart beating in rhythm with theirs, that shared sense of purpose, of resilience, anchoring me as I prepared to take my vows. Amidst the sea of familiar faces, I caught sight of my mother. Her eyes were brimming with pride, a stark contrast to my father's dismissive comments. In that moment, I understood that recognition of my worth didn't need to come from him. Maybe acceptance had always been about finding my tribe rather than forcing acceptance from someone unwilling to see my journey. I had navigated through the challenges of leadership, my determination often tested, but I had endured. Marrying the love of my life was a defense against past disapproval, a declaration that I was more than the child he belittled. I had forged my path, one filled with more than just military achievements. It was about the relationships I had cultivated along the way. As my partner took my hand and we exchanged vows, I felt a rush of clarity. I was no longer that uncertain young girl hoping for approval. I was a first lieutenant who had faced obstacles head-on. The words we spoke held weight, grounded in the understanding that love, just like service, required commitment and endurance. The Marines behind me held their heads high, unified, a collective embodiment of the principles I had strived to live by. They cheered, their voices lifting us in celebration, and for the first time, I truly felt my place in this world, where I belonged and who I had become. When the moment arrived and the Marines stood to salute, the air vibrated with their resounding SEMPER FI. It wasn't just a call to arms, it was a validation of my identity. In that powerful moment of camaraderie and respect, I sensed that my father's words had no hold over me. I had risen above the belittlement, transformed pain into purpose, and found strength in these men and women who stood steadfast beside me. I was proud of who I was and what I represented. Though I continued to pursue growth, emboldened by the support surrounding me, I realized I was never alone in this journey, nor would I ever need to seek validation from those who could not see my worth. As I stood at the altar, the weight of my father's laughter hung in the air, curling around me like smoke. I had always imagined my wedding day as a moment of triumph, a celebration of love and unity. Instead, I felt like a soldier standing alone in enemy territory, blindsided by the fierce winds of my father's disapproval. His derisive comments cut deeper than any training drill. They dug into the very core of who I was. Just moments before, I had walked down the aisle, adorned in white, but his laughter reminded me of that time in the field, when resilience was my only shield against the chaos surrounding me. When I was younger, I remembered my father as a steadfast figure, the one who instilled discipline and determination in me. He was proud when I enlisted, or so I thought. Over the years, however, I realized his pride was only in the potential he saw, not the reality that I had become. It was as if he couldn't reconcile the strong, confident woman I was growing into with the daughter he had envisioned, one who would follow a more traditional path. As the ceremony continued, I fought against the tears threatening to spill, but the truth was that this wasn't merely about the mocking words. It was about a lifetime of feeling like I was never quite enough for him. Then came the moment that would forever anchor itself in my memory. Just as I turned to face my fiancé, the gentle murmur of the gathered guests became a deafening roar, and my father hurled another jab that pierced directly through the facade. Dress like a Marine, act like one, but where's the heart, Marina? The laughter that followed crashed over me like a wave. I felt my breath hitch, caught between my roles as a daughter and an officer. I had fought for my country and worn my uniform with pride, but here I was, reduced to a punchline at my own wedding. It was as if all my sacrifices faded against the backdrop of his derision. And then, in that split second of despair, the Marines arrived. An unexpected wave of my brothers and sisters in arms flooded my mind, their presence grounding me like a steadying hand on my shoulder. I remembered the bonds forged in the heat of battle, the unyielding support we had for one another. Just as I was about to retreat into the shadows of my father's mockery, a voice pierced through the noise. "Semper Fi," they shouted in unison, their salute crisp and unwavering. The sound carried an energy that electrified the air, cutting through the hurt like a warm embrace. In that moment, I felt seen, accepted, and above all, valued, not for who my father wanted me to be, but for who I had fought hard to become. Their solidarity washed over me like a tide, and I realized that while I may never have my father's approval, I had a family right here, forged in the fires of sacrifice and camaraderie. My heart swelled as I returned the salute, a gesture laden with respect and gratitude. What my father failed to understand was that my identity was shaped not only in the spaces he inhabited but also in the camaraderie of those who stood beside me, unwavering and steadfast. In that moment, I chose to embrace my truth. The laughter and mockery faded, replaced with the understanding that I was enough, enough as a Marine, enough as a woman, and enough as a daughter, even if my father could never see it. I still remember the moment I arrived at the chapel, my heart pounding like a drum. It wasn't just the thrill of the day ahead that made me feel alive, it was the anticipation of proving something. On the surface, it was just a wedding, but deep down, I knew it was a test. My father's mocking words echoed in the back of my mind, a reminder of how he viewed my service, just a phase, a distraction from what he imagined my life should be. But there, in that stark white chapel, surrounded by friends and fellow Marines, I could feel a shift in the air. This wasn't just my wedding, it was a declaration. As I walked down the aisle, the eyes of my peers followed me, steadfast and unwavering. Each one was a reminder of late-night drills, shared laughter in the barracks, and the bonds we forged through sweat and tears. Unlike my father, they understood. They recognized not just me, but the sacrifices, the challenges, and the pride that came with wearing this uniform. I saw my best friend from basic training, her hair pulled back neatly as she watched me, smiling with a warmth that contrasted sharply with the chill left by my father's dismissiveness. In that moment, I thought of everything I had sacrificed to get here, not just for this day, but for my entire career. When the ceremony commenced, I could feel the weight of tradition and expectations surrounding me. Each word spoken felt like a thread weaving my life together, connecting my past experiences in the core with my future as a wife. I glanced at the Marines standing in formation, 200 of them, a sea of green and camouflage. They shared that same fierce loyalty, that same commitment to something greater than themselves. I couldn't help but think about the camaraderie built in those tense moments before deployment, when the stakes were high, and we leaned on one another. This community had become my family, a stark contrast to my own. The real turning point came when the officiant asked if anyone had anything to say about our union. I barely had time to catch my breath before my best friend stepped forward, her voice steady and clear. Marina once told me that getting married isn't about being someone's property, it's about partnership, about two people standing together as equals. With those words, I felt the energy shift in the room. The Marines erupted into applause, and without hesitation, they stood and saluted. "Semper Fi," they shouted in unison, their voices filling the chapel with a thunderous echo that rattled the walls. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of validation wash over me. I was more than just a daughter, I was a Marine, and I was part of something monumental. As I returned to my spot, my heart swelled with pride. My gaze caught my father's, and for a fleeting instant, I saw a flicker of confusion in his eyes, a hint of recognition about the woman I had become. I realized then that it didn't matter if he ever understood my choices or respected my service. My identity was forged in those moments with my peers, in the respect and loyalty we shared, and in the unwavering acknowledgement of who I had longed to be. As I took my vows, surrounded by a sea of uniforms and love, I understood that I wasn't alone. I was fortified by the community I had chosen, and it was the only validation I truly needed. The chapel was filled with laughter and clinking glasses, but I felt like an outsider in my own celebration. As I stood at the head of the room, my heart drummed a rapid rhythm against my chest. My father's voice echoed in my mind, the sharp edge of mockery clinging to each syllable as he recounted the story of my childhood mishaps. Each anecdote painted me as the awkward little girl who couldn't climb a tree without falling, as if all I'd achieved in those years of service and sacrifice were outweighed by some vague notion of failure. As I looked out at the faces of my friends and family, the pride they wore felt like a burden, not a celebration. I waited until I could gather my courage, settling the champagne flute on the table with a quiet resolve. My gaze steadied on my father, who was laughing with an old army buddy in the corner. I could see the carefree joy painted across his face, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing inside me. So much of my life had been spent striving to meet his expectations, and in that moment, I realized it was time to break that mold. If I couldn't confront him now, on what was meant to be a sacred day, when would I find the strength to do it? I stepped away from the crowd and made my way toward him, weaving through the huddled clusters of guests. It felt like every eye in the room turned to follow my journey, their glances shifting from curiosity to concern. I could feel the pressure mounting in my chest, but each step forward carried the weight of years of pent-up frustration and hurt. "Dad," I said, my voice cutting through the celebration like a knife, steady and unwavering. The laughter faltered, and I noticed the shift in the air, a tension that felt electric. "We need to talk. Now." His expression shifted, the bemusement replaced with something harder, indignation. "Marina, we're at your wedding. Can't this wait?" But I could see the flicker of recognition in his eyes, as if he'd suddenly realized there was more to me than just a little girl in a dress. "No, it can't wait," I declared, my heart pounding. "I'm tired of pretending that your jokes don't hurt me. You've always belittled my choices, whether it was about joining the Marines or finding my own path in life. I deserve more than your condescension, especially on a day that's meant to celebrate me." Silence fell, a thick blanket smothering the laughter and music of our shared joy. But before he could respond, the heavy doors of the chapel swung wide open. 200 Marines, my brothers and sisters in arms, marched in formation, their presence commanding. As they entered, the atmosphere shifted once again. I felt the warmth of pride rise within me, the respect and camaraderie we had shared blossoming like an unseen force. With one synchronized movement, they halted, turned sharply, and stood at attention. "Semper Fi," they shouted in unison, a thunderous declaration that echoed off the walls. My father's expression was unreadable, but my heart soared. In that moment, I was reminded that my worth wasn't defined by his approval but by the bonds and respect I had forged in the life I had chosen. The laughter still echoed in my ears, a haunting reminder of how my father had stood there, the bitterness of his words cutting through the joy of my wedding day. As I glanced at him, that sense of betrayal washed over me again, tightening my chest. We were surrounded by friends, family, and my brothers in arms from the Marine Corps, but all I could see was the disdain in his eyes, the words he had spoken, sarcastic and belittling, echoing like a cruel joke. I had spent my life earning this uniform, proving myself time and time again, and yet here was someone who had a front-row seat to that journey, laughing as if I were just a child playing dress-up. His reaction had not only stunned me, it had cut deep, a reminder of the chasm that lay between us. As the ceremony pressed on, the weight of my father's scorn fueled a determination within me. Surrounded by my military family, I found solace in their unwavering support. They understood the sacrifices I had made to wear this uniform, to stand as a first lieutenant in the U.S. Marine Corps, the battles fought, both external and internal. I could see in their eyes the respect that eluded my father's gaze. They had shared the hardships of training, the sweat, and the tears, and here they were, my comrades, cheering me on as I took this monumental step into marriage. I could feel their spirits rise with mine, lifting me above the sting of rejection. Then, there was that moment, when my husband, standing tall and proud beside me, turned to face our guests. "I want you all to meet my wife, First Lieutenant Marina," he announced, his voice steady and clear. It was then that the 200 Marines gathered, each representing the strength and resilience I had worked so hard to embody, stood as one. The sudden shift in atmosphere was palpable, the laughter died down, and a profound respect filled the air. "Semper Fi," they shouted, their voices intertwining in a resounding acknowledgement of my commitment, not only to my marriage but to my service. The sonorous salutation pulled me from the depths of despair, sweeping me away on a wave of camaraderie and pride. In that moment, my father's voice faded, and I felt a surge of emotion wash over me. It wasn't just about the uniform I wore or the rank I had achieved, it was about belonging, about having a family that recognized my worth beyond the walls of our home. I stood there, the insignia on my chest a badge of honor, and I realized that I had chosen my family, one built on shared experiences and mutual respect, rather than blood. I felt unyielding strength from the Marines surrounding me, their loyalty and support a stark contrast to the sting of my father's dismissal. It felt as if they were collectively lifting me, making me whole. Though I would always hold a small piece of hope for my father's acceptance, I understood that my journey was mine alone to navigate. I would not allow his mockery to define me or diminish the pride I felt. The ceremony continued, and as I exchanged vows with my husband, I vowed to honor those who stood beside me. I would tackle every challenge as fiercely as I had faced every drill, every deployment. Life, like the military, was full of obstacles and unexpected terrain. I would navigate it with the same courage and steadfastness I had learned in my years of service. Today marked a new beginning, not just as a wife, but as a woman grounded in her identity, resilient, proud, and forever a Marine. As I stood there, the weight of my uniform resting comfortably against my body, I could hardly believe it. This wasn't just a day to celebrate my marriage, it was a culmination of my journey, a moment of victory that echoed louder than any words my father ever could have hurled at me. The Marine Corps has taught me resilience, discipline, and that I am more than capable of carving my own path, even when others insist on belittling my worth. I no longer seek approval from the naysayers, their words have become mere whispers in the cacophony of my triumphs. I've worn my uniform with pride, faced challenges head-on, and learned to value my achievements beyond the limits placed upon me by those who couldn't see the strength I harbored within. I remember the sting of my father's laughter at my dreams back then, how it echoed around the dinner table, mocking the very essence of who I wanted to become. I can still see the look on his face when I decided to join the Marines, a mix of disbelief and disdain, as if I were betraying some unspoken family code. All those years, I fought against the tide, proving to myself and others that my ambitions were valid. My wedding day was not just a union of love but a declaration of independence from those who doubted me. The Marines stood with me, an unwavering force that reminded me I was part of something larger than my own fears. When those 200 Marines rose to their feet and saluted, shouting "Semper Fi," it wasn't just a show of respect, it was a recognition of my journey, an affirmation of my worth that transcended familial ties. In that powerful moment, surrounded by the honor and camaraderie that runs deep in the core, I felt an undeniable sense of belonging. Their voices rang out like a symphony, drowning out the years of mockery I had endured. Each salute felt like an embrace, an acknowledgement that I had fought battles not just on the field, but within my own heart. It was a reminder that I am more than what anyone has ever said about me. I am a fighter, a sister, a daughter, and now a wife. As I turned to face my new husband, the love in his eyes reflected back all the years of struggle and strength I had fought to establish for myself. It was in that moment that I felt the chains of my past shatter against the solid ground beneath my feet. I don't need my father's approval to know who I am. I have built my identity on the foundation of my experiences, the challenges I've overcome, and the love I've chosen to embrace. I felt liberated, ready to step into this next chapter, not just as a wife but as a beacon of hope for others who faced similar challenges. My story is mine to tell, and it's filled with resilience and pride. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the celebration, I couldn't help but feel a surge of gratitude for the battles I had fought. Each moment, each tear shed on this journey, had led me here, to this moment of joy and acceptance. I looked out at my fellow Marines, standing tall and proud, and realized there was no greater honor than standing shoulder to shoulder with those who had seen me through my darkest days. I raised my glass, not just to love and marriage but to the spirit of strength that defines us all. Today, I'm not just a bride, I'm a manifestation of the belief that we can rise above the mockery of others and define our own destinies, proudly wearing the scars of our battles as badges of honor. If you stayed with me until the end, thank you. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from.